I'm not a fan of boxing, but you can't be of a certain age in America and not know the nickname of Muhammad Ali, the one who floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee. People called him the greatest. Somehow, that nickname came to mind as I studied today's gospel lesson. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus is fielding the third challenging question in a row. The first, regarding paying taxes to the emperor, came from the disciples or the students of the Pharisees, those for whom the Torah, or Jewish law, was the greatest concern. The second question, which our lectionary skips over, is a question from the Sadducees, a wealthy and powerful group associated with the temple in Jerusalem. They didn't believe in a resurrection after death, and their question is focused on hypothetical marriage relationships after the resurrection from the dead. Jesus also neatly puts them in their place, so that as the text says, they are astounded. Finally, as we hear today, the Pharisees put forward one of their own, who also happens to be a lawyer. Teacher, he says, which commandment in the law is the greatest? And here, Jesus' reply is stinging in its simplicity. He answers with what is known by the smallest child as the Shema, from the Hebrew word for hear. It begins the best-known saying in Judaism, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength." The youngest child to the oldest child recited it twice a day, in the morning and in the evening. Then Jesus adds the love for neighbor as yourself that we heard in our lesson today from Leviticus. In a sense, he's saying to them, in trying to trap me, you are assuming I will be overwhelmed by the sheer number of laws and prescriptions. But it's really very simple. These two commandments encompass all the others. And if you're able to keep these, you're able to keep the whole law. Once again, he confounds through the simplest, truest wisdom. And then he asks them a question. What do you think of the Messiah? Whose son is he? They answer as people who've been taught the answer for many years, the son of David. Then Jesus quotes Psalm 110, which was thought to be written by David. How could David call the one who would be known as his son by the name of Lord? Who was first in time, and who was first in greatness? Once again, Jesus' challengers are unable to respond, and we are told that no one dared to ask him any more questions. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus next spends time in a tirade against the scribes and Pharisees, followed by time in instruction and prophecy with the disciples, and then finally is betrayed and handed over to judgment and death. By its placement in the Gospel of Matthew, this text is the climax of the opposition to Jesus. And what does it emphasize? Love for God, neighbor, and self. And Jesus' indirect association of himself with the names Messiah and Son of God. In other words, today we hear the what and the who of Christianity. And we are blessed to hear the what in words that come directly from the who. The greatest commandments from the one who is figuratively David's son, but who is greater than David. On these two commandments, Jesus says, hang all the law and the prophets. These are the two that tell us what God's good intentions are for us all, that everyone is cared for and receives blessings through a right relationship with God and with each other. David Lose, a professor from my seminary, shared this story about his first colleague in ministry, whose name is Frank. When Frank was 9 or 10, he found himself in an argument with his younger sister. Before long, arguing turned to pushing and shoving then turned to hitting. Just as Frank had his sister pinned on the ground, fist raised in the air, his mother came into the room. "Franklin," she bellowed, "stop that." At that, as Frank would tell it, he turned his head toward his mother and said, as only a young boy can, "She's my sister, and I can do anything I want to her." At which point, Frank's mother swooped across the room, towered over him, and said, "She's my daughter. No, you can't." The law of love shows that God cares what happens to all God's children. The law of love is a loving no to our desire to own everything, to direct everything, to scapegoat the people we'd like to scapegoat. And to the extent that our country's laws assure the freedom and protection of all people, they are based on the law of love of neighbor. During October, for instance, we draw national attention to the issue of domestic violence, which still plagues us over so many years. Imagine Frank as a grown man with only the law to prevent him from saying, "She's my wife, and I can do whatever I want to her." The civil law's best intention is to protect vulnerable people and to allow as much freedom in our society as possible. And the best intention of God's law is the health, life, and blessing of all God's people and creatures. Sometimes someone will show us a way to love God and love our neighbor as ourselves. Just a few days ago, St. Francis received a wonderful gift of love from Father Ken, a bequest from his estate that will help us to enhance our ministry to all people. I would anticipate that this thoughtful gift of love to this congregation will help us to make this building more accessible. And over the months, and perhaps years with God's guidance, we will determine how best to continue to use that gift to love God and our neighbors. Some themes are emerging from the Mission Committee retreat that will help us to focus for the future. Welcoming all people, enhancing the health and vitality of the congregation and the community, and the inspiration and expressiveness of the arts. I will share more when I know more. Father Ken was a remarkable servant of God, a saint whose life was a gift to all who encountered him. But it's easy to say, "I can't love to that extent. I just don't have it in me." We've tended to think of love as a feeling, as in the vein of Bonnie Raitt's song, "I Can't Make You Love Me." She sings, "I can't make you love me if you don't. You can't make your heart feel something it won't." And if we see love as a feeling that we may or may not be able to generate, we may not care, or on the other hand, we may despair at our inability to love. Many theologians see the command to love as a command that has little to do with feeling and much more to do with action. About a week ago, I saw an astounding video on Facebook that I shared with other people on my own profile. It was taped in a Spanish-speaking country, and it's a news video of a dog trying to cross a 4-lane highway and being hit by 2 cars. Then out of nowhere, another dog comes along, goes directly to the injured dog, and uses its front paws to drag the first dog to safety at the median. And oncoming cars are able to swerve to miss the 2 dogs. The injured dog apparently survived, or it would be difficult to watch. It is astonishing. It's as pure an example of love and action as anything I've seen. But can we know how the rescued dog was feeling? Not likely. And it wouldn't matter anyway. What matters is the action that it took to save the other dog, another creature of God. So we know that God wants us to love him with all our heart and soul and mind or strength, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. But living and loving in that balance is hard. At various times we find it difficult to love God. When life is hard, when people suffer, when illness strikes, and when innocent people are preyed upon by those with evil intentions. Sometimes it's difficult to love others when resources seem scarce, when the order of the day is competition rather than cooperation, and when we need to forgive in order to love them. And sometimes it's difficult to love ourselves when we have failed to live up to our own expectations, when we've hurt others, when we feel weak, when we know ourselves to be addicted to unhealthy behavior. So we have the gift of the law of love, and we have our inability to love in every situation. That's when we turn to the one whom we know to be the greatest, the one who can help us to continue to try to keep the greatest commandments, the commandments of love, and the one who, when we fail, stands by ready to forgive, that we might try again. With all our heart and soul and mind, we bless and thank that one as we fall, pick ourselves up, and try again. No, we're not the greatest, but the one who is loved us more than his own life. Because of that love, we do our very best to respond.